The government has at its possession more than a dozen spacecraft that were retrieved from crash sites. There are 4 types of aliens that were recovered. The defense budget is almost $1 trillion for 2026. They are supposed to figure out what flies in our sky. And yet the Director of National Intelligence was admitting that they cannot figure out the nature of some objects. It's a serious matter of national security.
Dr. Avi Loeb. He's a former member of the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology, the former chair on the Board of Physics and Astronomy of the National Academies. He's testified in front of Congress asking for them to release unidentified information that we know the government has regarding other planets and what that means for our humanity.
Suppose we see a technological object from an alien civilization flying near Earth, 3I Atlas, bigger than Manhattan Island, twice as big as the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs. Astronomers claim that this is a comet. The cometary tail. That's what distinguishes a comet. Guess what? There is no tail. But more importantly, there is glow in front of the object instead of behind it. Is 3I Atlas alien technology. It could be a mothership that releases mini probes. I don't know if there will be meaning to money if this object turns out to be technological after October 29th.
You're not celebrating Halloween this year. That's the take-home message.
We shouldn't worry about the Earth. It's about saving humanity that we should worry.
Hi, I'm Mayim Bialik.
And I'm Jonathan Cohen.
And welcome to our breakdown. We are in a special location. We happen to be away somewhere where it's 105 degrees. So we are inside in air conditioning. Today, we're going to be talking about the fabric of our very existence as we couch it in the possibility of life on other planets, life that has possibly existed for millions or billions of years before we do. Basically, we're going to be talking about how insignificant we are and how incredibly significant the research is in astrophysics that is examining life on other planets and the possibility of us even living on other planets. We're going to be talking today to Dr. Avi Loeb. And Dr. Loeb is the Frank Baird Jr. Professor of Science at Harvard University. He's a best-selling author. His latest book is Interstellar, The Search for Extraterrestrial Life and Our Future in the Stars. He's a former member of the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology at the White House, a former chair on the Board of Physics and Astronomy of the National Academies. He's a guy who has testified in front of Congress asking for them to release unidentified information that we know the government has regarding things that only people like Dr. Avi Loeb can actually analyze and determine if they come from other planets and what that means for our humanity.
He also talks about 3I Atlas, which many scientists believe is a comet, but he believes may be alien spacecraft, and it is coming very close with the target date of October 29th.
Before we welcome our guest to the breakdown, I want to say thank you. And please make sure that you are subscribed here. Hit the little bell icon. You'll get notified when new episodes drop, and it helps us make more. We're so excited you're here. And without further ado, here is Dr. Avi Loeb. Welcome to the breakdown.
Break it down.
Thanks for having me.
This is kind of an awkward question, but I'm going to ask it. Why and how do you feel so comfortable speaking so informally about the existence of aliens?
Oh, why? Because I don't believe that we are special. I was invited to give a talk at the birth town of Copernicus, Turun, a couple of years ago. The Polish government asked me, and I decided to speak about the next Copernican revolution. He informed us that maybe we are not at the center of the solar system or the universe, based on the data that he looked at. And the next Copernican revolution would be that we are not at the intellectual center of the universe. Now, why do I think that's very likely? Because, you look out and you see a lot of stars like the sun. You see 100 billion of them in the Milky Way galaxy alone. And we estimate that at least a few percent of them have a planet like the Earth roughly at the same separation. So that means that there are billions of Earth-Sun analogs out there. So it's like looking at the street. You live in a house and you see a lot of houses just like yours. Now, many of my colleagues would say, okay, we see a lot of houses, but how do you know that they have residents or that they ever had residents? And I say that is the most natural assumption. When my daughters were young, they thought that they are the only ones in the world, like the world centers on them, simply because, it's just like LLMs, the AI systems that have a training data set. So my daughters had a very limited training data set, which is our home. And all the attention was on them. Obviously, they thought that they are the center of the universe. That's what humanity did as well, okay? Until Copernicus and Galileo Galilei argued otherwise. So at some point, my daughters looked through the window and saw other houses, but they never imagined that there are infants just like them over there until the first day in the kindergarten. And then they were shocked that not only there are others like them, but also they're not the smartest. And I think we haven't matured yet as a civilization. And I think the more natural thing to assume is, no, we are not special. There were things like us billions of years ago. The sun formed in the last 1/3 of cosmic history, and most stars formed billions of years before the sun. And there was plenty of time for those other civilizations to exceed our capabilities. In fact, there were 100 billion people on Earth so far. And you should ask, where is everybody? Well, the answer is most of them are dead. There are only 8 billion alive right now. And the same must be true for civilizations that existed. Most of them are dead. But what I'm trying to find is, if they left behind any relics. I'm doing sort of space archaeology. My search is similar to thinking that, you have a backyard, and very often you see rocks in the backyard, and some of the rocks come from the street. But every now and then you might find a tennis ball that was thrown by a neighbor. And I'm saying that's a very different approach than waiting for a phone call from a neighbor, which is pretty much what the SETI community, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, did over the past 75 years or so. They were just trying to wait for a radio signal. That's the idea of contact. And, that is very different than checking your mailbox for any package that may have arrived in the mail.
I think one of the things that really astounded me in your book was the comparison that you made was if you were to take someone from I sort of think in major epics of history. I think of like the several thousand years we know about before Jesus's time, right? Then right around zero, you know and then I think of like a slew of progress, innovation. I think of the Renaissance. I think of the Enlightenment. I think of the Industrial Revolution. I think of all these things that have, happened. And what you said is if you were to present an iPhone, to someone living in biblical times, let's say,
So a cave dweller, for example.
right, or even a cave dweller, it's almost like there wasn't the capacity for cognition, to be able to form, right, a story around what is this.
The cave dweller would say it's a rock of a type that I've never seen before. And that's what my colleagues are saying about the interstellar objects. They say like Oumuamua, or now 3i Atlas, is an object of a type that I've never seen before. We can talk more about it. But my hope is if the cave dweller says that, there would be a kid of the cave dweller that would look at the rock and realize that they can press a button and something else will happen. And so that is the kid that will bring progress to humanity. And that's why, I think that science is really a great privilege to maintain your childhood curiosity. And my advice to young people is never behave as the adults in the room. I was traumatized at the dinner table as a kid when I would ask a difficult question and the adults in the room would give me an answer that didn't make sense. And they pretended to know more than they actually know. And becoming a scientist is really the privilege of asking questions. As science is, as I said today at CNN in the morning, I said that, science, we shouldn't censor any question. Any question is legitimate within science. People think, oh, how dare you speak about this possibility? And I say, no, within science, you can ask any question you want. You can brainstorm whatever comes to your mind. The scientific method is all about getting data to answer the question. That's very different from politics, where you just need to convince other people to do something. That's very different from the the discussions on social media where you have to get likes. It's not about that. It's not about humans agreeing with you. It's about what describes the physical reality. And by getting enough data about reality, eventually we'll figure it out, just like a detective story. And, that's a lot of fun. That's fun. Science should not be boring. And really, the biggest problem with the way science is deliberated right now is that scientists have a press conference where they lecture to the public on what the public should understand, and they don't take any debates. They just tell the other side, the reporters, what they should know. But science is work in progress. There are always doubts, there are always uncertainties, and that's actually the fun part. And if science was portrayed as work in progress, and the scientists would not try to show off that they are smarter than the people they talk with, then science would be much more credible, because a lot of the credibility went away, for example, during COVID-19. And when politics is introduced into science, that's pretty bad.
One of the things you talked about is the difference in capability that we might observe between us and a species, let's say, that has millions of years of a head start on us, billions of years of a head start on us. It's this. We spoke to Robin Hansen, and I was like, "This is nuts! Like, I can't even wrap my head around it." But what I was explaining to my teenager was that we are closer to the possibility of technological understanding and AI than, let's say, cave people were to an iPhone. However, there's still going to be this gap. So when you talk about a civilization that might have this kind of head start, because my brain can only do what it can, I'm thinking, oh, they must have had like a Jesus figure, and then they had, an enlightenment, and they had paintings, and then they had skyscrapers, and then they had terrorism. Like, I'm picturing our existence
Right.
a million years ago. But that's not necessarily what would have happened, because it's
No.
got its entire own time
Exactly.
course, like a whole bunch of other, like, I'm trying to literally
Yeah.
wrap my head around what that looks
Exactly.
like.
So first of all, advice on a blind date. Don't express your opinion at first. Just observe. And so, when we deal with aliens, it's a blind date of astronomical proportions. And we should be open-minded to things we have never imagined, that not even Hollywood scripts have imagined. Because just like artificial intelligence, they were trained on data on Earth. All of the imaginations that we can find in the literature, in movies and so forth, they're based on experiences on Earth. And when you have a visitor from another star, all bets are off. Okay. Now, of course, in the small scale, you can imagine the way that the Iranian air defense responded to the B-2 bombers. They couldn't do much about it. So if they come to us and they have the technology that is a little bit above, then we won't be able to cope with it. But definitely, when you see airplanes, you know what you're dealing with. Here, it could be something that we cannot comprehend. So they could have the advantage of the amount of time that they develop science and technology, of course. But there is another difference that could be quite more important, and that is the size of the brain, or the capability, how many neural connections our brain has versus their brain has. Because it's possible that we are just limited by our brain, and the brain developed to the maximum size possible within the human body, that consumes about 20 watts, by the way. If you compare it to AI systems that consume gigawatts, it's quite amazing what biology did. And I think at some point we will have to visit the question, can you make AI with biology, using chemical reactions rather than silicon chips, which are very different. They are not flesh and blood. But our brain uses just 15% of up to 15% of the of the power that the human body provides, and that's what limited it. It can't grow bigger because that's the maximum power the body can give it, the metabolic power. So it's possible that they have a different nutrition, a different digestion system, so that their brains are bigger. And if their brains are bigger, we just wouldn't understand them. It's just like we are the dumb kid in the class.
They might not even be humanoid.
No, exactly. They might be something completely crazy. So I'm saying let's not imagine anything before the blind date. Let's just keep our eyes open and then deal with it when we see it.
The only reason you're allowed to say that, like, it could be crazy is because you, like, work for Harvard and you're wearing a tie.
Fundamentally, I'm not a Harvard person. I'm not a Harvard groomed person. I grew up on a farm. I just happened to get a tenured appointment at Harvard. I'm not sure yet why, but it happened 32 years ago that I arrived at Harvard. And but the way I think is just like anyone else. I'm just curious, and science gives me the privilege of pursuing it. I mean, anyone. You see, what you just said is the kind of the way that herders keep the herd in a tight configuration. You are being told by the adults in the room not to misbehave. Okay, you are being told not to imagine things. You are being told to stay within the beaten path. And I'm telling you, no, that's just the narrative you heard from people who do not have imagination. And in fact, that slows down progress. That slows down innovation. I want you to feel like a kid, and imagine anything you want.
Why don't we go into the discussing the objects, because that is almost more tangible, right? Like, I like the analogy of the ball being thrown into the yard. If a tennis ball is in your yard and you don't know where it came from, maybe you don't even know what a tennis ball is, you're going to be like, okay, what is this? It's a tangible object. And there's been an enormous amount of conversation, especially with the congressional hearings, of all these people claiming there are all these objects that everyone has and every government has objects, and but we can't show you, but I promise you I've seen them.
So let me tell you an anecdote on that exact issue. On the 1st of May, 2025, this year, I gave a briefing in Congress. The day before that, I was invited to visit the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office in the Pentagon. And that is the organization that was established after the Director of National Intelligence submitted the 3 reports to the US Congress admitting that they're not doing their job. The defense budget is almost $1 trillion for 2026. And they're supposed to figure out what flies in our sky. And yet the Director of National Intelligence was admitting that they cannot figure out the nature of some objects. To me, that's a very rare admission, because it basically says we're getting a lot of money to do the job and we don't do it. Okay, so it's a serious matter of national security. If these are manufactured by adversarial nations, we need to figure it out. That's what I said in Congress. I said, look, if you want to figure it out, I'm happy to collect a bunch of scientists that will help you do that. It's not a matter of the kind of sensors you are using. It's just like in any other scientific matter, it's the quality of the people that analyze the data. I said, if you want to invest $1 billion in getting something like the Manhattan Project, I'm all for it. And we can figure it out. But the reason I bring this up is a day after visiting, so I was at the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, and this is the organization that was supposed to look into those cases, into the reports of objects that cannot be identified. And, I asked them, did you find anything? You've been at it for 2 years now. And they said, no, we pretty much have access to all the information. And whenever there was data available, it looked like human-made. Nothing unusual, nothing extraterrestrial, except for a few FBI reports. That's what they said. But then in Congress, after I gave my briefing, next to me was sitting Eric Davis. He said he worked for the government decades ago, and the government has at its possession about a dozen or more than a dozen spacecraft that were retrieved from crash sites and with pilots. And there are 4 types of aliens that were recovered.
This person said that there's debris, including pilots, like
Yes.
the people who were in the
Yes.
unidentified.
And 4 types of those biological creatures that were recovered.
Four types of them.
Yes. Now, what I thought about is, well, first thing I thought, who should I believe? Should I believe the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office in the Pentagon the day before that said there is nothing? Or should I believe Eric Davis that says I was in government and I know that this exists somewhere? And I I asked my wife, who should I believe? I'm a scientist. I respond to data, and I didn't see any evidence. If I were to see something the government has, of course, I would be glad to help them figure it out. But without seeing it, I cannot just believe stories. People tell stories all the time, and when there is a car accident, you hear different reports, and each of them is different. Like different people see different things, and it's just I cannot tell if it's a real story or not. And also, I can imagine a situation where there is indeed a retrieval and reverse engineering program within government, but that's for equipment that was found in crash sites of of debris from adversarial nations. So we want to figure them out, and of course there might be pilots there, human pilots that belong to different nations of different types, and so the story might be twisted in a way so that those nations will not know what our intelligence agencies know. So that is a possibility. And then Eric Davis hears secondhand that there are these things, and he thinks it's aliens, but it's not really it. So I just don't know what to make of it. But here is my solution. My solution is I don't believe stories. I don't believe people. I adopt the approach of FIFA, the Soccer World Organization. When there is a disputed goal, FIFA doesn't go to the goalkeeper or goes to the audience and asks, was there a goal or not? They use cameras. They record the event with instruments that have no personality. And then they decide, was there a goal or not? And I want to approach it this. I don't care about the past. I just want to collect data that will tell me the answer, from instrument.
Okay. I'm gonna go with your criteria for data collection. There are two things in particular, I don't know what to call them, crafts, objects. The first is, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. Is it Oumuamua?
Okay, now we're dealing with something else. So previously I was talking about the unidentified anomalous phenomena that are inside the Earth's atmosphere. Now what you're talking about is something that astronomers discovered with telescopes. These are objects flying through the inner solar system, but they're not colliding with Earth, they're not coming into Earth's atmosphere, they're just passing by at a speed that indicates that they're not bound by gravity to the sun. These are called interstellar objects. And they were found only over the past 8 years, okay, with telescopes. And as you say, the first one was named Oumuamua because it was discovered by a telescope in Hawaii, and it means a scout in the Hawaiian language. And the second one was called Borisov, after the amateur astronomer Gennady Borisov that discovered it. Ended up being a comet, nothing unusual, comet similar to what we know in the solar system. Oumuamua was really peculiar because it changed its brightness by a factor of 10 as it was tumbling every 8 hours. And that variation of reflected sunlight implied, based on very detailed analysis, that it's disc-like, it's flat in its shape, very unusual. And then it was pushed away from the sun by some mysterious force without showing any evaporation. There was no cometary tail, there was no gas or dust around it. And I just suggested maybe it's a very thin object that is pushed by reflecting sunlight, and the same telescope in Hawaii, 3 years later, after 2017, in 2020, it discovered an object called the 2020 SO that was definitely pushed by sunlight, ended up being a rocket booster from a 1966 launch by NASA. And the question is, who produced Oumuamua? But then the third one was discovered on July 1st, 2025. And since then, I wrote 4 papers about it. For some reason, my name became viral on I don't have any footprint on social media, but I'm told that every second there is a tweet about it.
Where did we come from? Meaning, how did we get here?
That's an excellent question. Because humans arrived on Earth just a few million years ago. And that's a one part in 1,000 or so of the Earth's history. And when people say, we need to save the Earth went through catastrophes, many of them, before we came to exist. The Earth would survive us. We shouldn't worry about the Earth. It's about saving humanity that we should worry. And moreover, the only catastrophe that the Earth would get eliminated through is when the sun in 7.6 billion years will expand at the end of its life and will engulf the Earth. At that point, the moon, as a result of the friction on the sun's envelope, the moon will collide back, come back to Earth. The moon came from Earth, but it will come back to Earth, and then the Earth will sink all the way to the center of the sun. So that's the only reason the Earth will disappear at some point in the future. But coming back to the question, where did we come from? That's an interesting question. Of course, the standard scientific version is that we came from perhaps chimpanzees or in Africa, and but somehow we managed to develop intelligence far beyond any other species on Earth. And the question is, there is a fundamental question whether that was a result of a visit by some interstellar gardener that decided to introduce intelligence into this planet. And we just don't know because it's not documented. Humans documented history over the past 8,000 years or so. And one reason I'm seeking intelligence in interstellar space is because I don't often find it in academia.
I've been under the assumption that the process of evolution, the way I was taught as an undergraduate in graduate school, was accurate. Am I supposed to entertain the possibility that there was an interstellar visit from a being that inserted intelligence into our evolutionary DNA?
It's possible. And let me bring another possibility. We think that 66 million years ago, there was a giant rock the size of Manhattan Island that killed the non-avian dinosaurs. What if that was not a rock, but some giant thing that collided with Earth to reset the biological life on Earth? Or, there are all kinds of events if you go back hundreds of millions of years. And we just don't know. It was never documented. We don't know what happened. We know that the common ancestor of life, it's called Luca, the last universal common ancestor. Right now, it was dated by DNA to have appeared 4.2 billion years ago. That was the Earth formed around 4.5 billion years ago. And within 300 million years, life started with this common ancestor. And we don't know where it came from. It could have come from Mars because Mars cooled before the Earth. It's a smaller body. It had more surface area for its mass than the Earth, and therefore it could have cooled earlier, and life could have started on Mars. We know it had lakes, rivers, oceans of water, just like Earth. And we know that the two planets exchanged rocks. And if life started, if Luca was first on Mars and delivered to Earth with a rock, this is called panspermia. That's the delivery of life in rocks. Then what Elon Musk is trying to do right now is return to our childhood home. In fact, there were astronauts, tiny astronauts, microbes in the cores of these early rocks that were the first to make the trip from Mars to Earth. And it's possible that Luca, that started life on Earth, came from Mars. We don't know because we haven't found yet evidence for life on Mars. And when we find it, we can see if it looks just like ours.
I mean, it's kind of funny because if we hadn't read your credentials, we might say this sounds crazy. Meaning, I don't, it never occurred to me. I mean, first of all, I think it's adorable that we consider, microbes that might be traveling in rocks tiny astronauts. I just think that's cute. But I think the sort of notion of, well, we could have been visited by aliens from Mars is something that many of us would not usually speak of, or assume is spoken about in legitimate academic circles, and it is.
No, there are scientific papers talking about it. It's just that we don't have the data to support it as of now. If we find life on Mars, we can check if it's identical to life on Earth, and that would suggest that the two planets shared life among them. But I can give you advice, very simple advice. If you ever encounter an alien, don't shake their hand. And the reason is simple, because life on Earth, all forms of life on Earth, has a particular helicity. The DNA molecules and RNA molecules, they all are oriented. Their structure is such that it's sort of It has handedness, and you could have imagined mirror life where the handedness was the opposite. But all life on Earth has the same handedness. The molecules are organized; their structure is, clockwise, let's say, and not counterclockwise. And we brought 120 grams of material from the asteroid Bennu back to Earth, and studied it over the past year. And it turns out that on this asteroid, the amino acids had both chiralities, both orientations with equal probability, 50% each. And somehow this symmetry was broken when life started on Earth. Now, the reason I say don't shake the hand of an alien is because our bodies are not protected against, bacteria or other living organisms that have the opposite handedness. And in that sense, if you get a disease from a bacteria that has the opposite handedness, the body cannot cope with that because it's used to all forms of life that have the same handedness. And so it could be catastrophic health-wise. That's why I'm saying going to Mars is dangerous, because if, for example, life developed there with an opposite handedness, then you might get sick and you won't survive that. And that's something that Elon Musk doesn't talk about. He doesn't talk about all the health hazards, that the fact that there is obviously no atmosphere, you're not protected against cosmic rays that can damage your body, destroy your brain within a matter of a few years if you're not shielded. It doesn't talk about the temperature variations between day and night that are hundreds of degrees. We will have to go into caves if we ever go to Mars. Sort of ironic, because our prehistory was in caves to protect ourselves from the weather. When we go to Mars, we'll have to go down into those caves. If I ever go to Mars, I would like to check if there are any wall paintings on the caves, because that would mean that someone was there before us.
It's towards the end of your book, the possibility that our universe was created in the laboratory of an advanced technological civilization provides humanity both of the possibilities that we have sort of a secular explanation and also a potentially one that's consistent with a religious notion. You talk about our universe has a flat geometry with a zero net energy, and an advanced civilization could have developed some technology to create sort of a baby universe, you call it. Is it possible? I mean, I know there's a lot of presuppositions, that we'd have to sort of also be comfortable with. But what is the possibility, and how does that work, that we may have been created by another species that has long pre-existed ours?
Well, it's a very simple idea. By the way, I'm simple-minded, despite of what you might think. I was born on a farm in Israel, and I only say what I understand. Okay, and so it's a very simple idea. There is nothing fancy about it. Basically, as of now, we have two pillars of modern physics. One is called quantum mechanics, and that's responsible for all the electronic instruments that you're using, that we are communicating through. We understand how to make those as a result of understanding quantum mechanics. Okay, and that deals with elementary particles primarily. Then there is the theory of gravity that Albert Einstein came up with 110 years ago. It's called the general theory of relativity, where gravity is not a force, it's actually the curvature of space and time. Okay. The problem is unifying these two pillars, bringing them together to a single theory that includes both in a consistent way. And Albert Einstein dedicated the last part of his life to this mission and couldn't do it. There are people that dedicated the last 50 years of theoretical physics to this mission in the context of mostly string theory, and they don't make any predictions. But I'm saying, their theory is not unique. It's not complete enough to make any forecasts about experimental data. But anyway, I'm saying, suppose you have a higher level of intelligence. Maybe it's a problem of the human brain. Maybe it's a problem of lack of data. We don't have enough data. But imagine a civilization that had more than 1 century of science and technology since they discovered quantum mechanics. So they had plenty of time, maybe thousands of years, millions of years, maybe even billions of years. And they have developed a theory that unifies quantum mechanics and gravity. It's called quantum gravity. What does it mean? Okay, so according to Einstein's theory of gravity, if we go back in time, we end up in the Big Bang. We see the universe is expanding, and you just reverse the movie backwards, and you get a denser and hotter state of everything until you reach an infinite density. And at that point, Einstein's theory breaks down. It cannot handle an extremely high curvature of space-time. And of course, it's because it doesn't have quantum mechanics, because quantum mechanics is important at very high densities of matter. Quantum effects start to play a role. And so suppose we had a theory of quantum gravity, then we would be able to figure out to replace the singularity of the Big Bang that exists in Einstein's gravity with an actual scenario for how the universe started, what was there before the Big Bang. Okay, that's it. So we could go beyond the Big Bang back in time and figure out what were the initial conditions that led to the Big Bang. What was there before the Big Bang? Now, if you think about it, it's just like a recipe for a cake. Because if you have the ingredients and you know how to put them together and how much heat to apply to them at any given time, you can make a cake, bake a cake. And if we had a theory of quantum gravity, we would know how to make a baby universe. You just put the ingredients at the right order with enough heat, and you end up with a universe. Now, of course, if you go back to the Old Testament in the first chapter of the Bible, it says that God did just that. God created the universe. What I'm saying is, once we have a theory of quantum gravity, anyone that has it can apply for the job of God. Why? Because in principle, you have a recipe for that cake. Okay. Now, the question of whether you can make the cake or not depends on what oven you have. If you don't have the oven to bake the cake, you can't make it. And that means in the context of the universe, you need to create a very high density of matter and radiation and somehow create the conditions that led to the Big Bang. Maybe we can't do it engineering-wise, but we will have the recipe. If anyone is asking for job applications, we would be able to apply. We would say, because the requirement would be, if you want to apply for the job of God, you should be able to create a universe. And if we have the recipe, we know how to do it. So now my point is as follows. If there are civilizations that developed to the level of being able to have that recipe and maybe even realize it in the laboratory, they can create a baby universe, then you can have universes continuing as babies inside, just like humans, that, the babies become adults and give birth to new babies. Okay, so within our universe, there would be aliens that would be able to create baby universes, and inside those baby universes, presumably if the conditions are right, you will have scientists that will eventually figure out how to make additional baby universes. So that's sort of a way to resolve the Big Bang singularity and imagine that this sequence continued forever.
I studied neuroscience as an undergrad, and I studied neuroscience and I got my PhD. And I was busy learning about molecular and cellular neuroscience and cognitive neuroscience. And, the most out there thing I studied was like consciousness and religion. Are there substrates in the brain for that? I don't know when I missed the portion of history when we went from there's no aliens to of course there's aliens. But something happened that I think a lot of people missed.
Yeah, when I started astrophysics, it was thought that maybe the solar system is unique and that other stars may not have planets. That was entertained by astronomers. And, there was an astronomer named Otto Struve that back in 1952 suggested, let's check if there are Jupiter's mass planets next to stars because they are so big. Jupiter is big, and when it passes in front of the star, we will see a reduction in the flux of the star, or it will move the star back and forth that we can detect. And people ignored it. And then in 1995, the first hot Jupiter close to a star, was discovered next to a sun-like star, and the Nobel Prize was awarded for that. And just as a footnote, the paper that discovered that did not cite Otto Struve, just to show you, not only people ignored his suggestion for more than 40 years, but when it was actually realized, he didn't get the credit in the paper that won the Nobel Prize. That's the way science happens very often. People forget. But to answer your question, since the discovery of that planet, we are seeing planets everywhere. Okay, and so the fact that there are so many Earth-Sun analogs out there implies that it's not so rare to imagine circumstances similar to ours. That changes the psychology. But most of the astrobiologists, those that are interested in life out there, in the mainstream of astronomy, they say, oh, microbes formed really early on Earth, immediately. And therefore, we should search for microbes. They are probably much more abundant. The existence of intelligence is an extraordinary claim. And the mistake they are making, so they are willing, as the highest priority right now in mainstream astronomy, it is to build the next space telescope that would search for microbes through the chemical fingerprints that they leave in the atmospheres of planets far away. And that is a very subtle signature, and that's why it would cost more than $10 billion to build a telescope that would detect it. But even if we detect oxygen, methane, water vapor, it would not demonstrate that there is life, because you can make these molecules also by geological processes. My point is, it may be easier to detect intelligent life, because if we see a gadget flying by and we can tell that it's not a rock, that will be beyond any doubt, and that will show us that not only life exists, but intelligent life exists. And intelligence can build self-replicating probes that will be easier to detect. It might target us at the center of the solar system, so the chance of it visiting us might be higher than some random rock or something else. So my point is, we should do both. We should hedge our bets. And so the discussion, in my view, didn't go that far enough. You're saying it went too much beyond what you expected, but I'm saying not far enough, because I think we should hedge our bets and invest billions of dollars in the search for microbes and the search for intelligence. And frankly, I find microbes boring. I think we can learn much more by finding a smarter kid on the block. And the one thing I'm hoping for is, suppose we see a technological object from an alien civilization flying near Earth. I think it will unite people. I think it will bring a sense, to me, it sounds like the messianic age, where peace may come to Earth, because we will start looking up and realize that we are all in the same boat. We are part of the same team. There is someone else out there. There is nothing better to unify people than that sentiment. And so my view of the messianic age is actually that the Messiah, quote unquote, will come from another star.
I think there's a few things that could happen. One of the best ways to unite with someone is to have a common enemy. And that would be one possibility. Like, we're busy killing each other and fighting, but there's something that would like to kill us much more than we would like to kill each other. And what I instantly think of, again, like, we can only put our framework, right, on what's happening. And I'll be honest, like, I was the kid who at the dinner table, like, oh, you tell me to eat this that I don't want to, I will eat it. You tell me finish it, I will finish it. Like, I will be the most obedient person at the dinner table. So my brain doesn't really like go in all of these places, but I'm trying. So the first thing that I think of is, one of the most exciting things when anthropologists would talk about, the possibility of like Homo sapiens sapiens living at the same time as Neanderthalensis, right? Imagine you have two or pick any other, iterations of humans, right? The notion that we could have had, a far more intelligent, let's say, species, um, ruling over, a less, I don't know, competent. There was all these jokes about all the poor, Neanderthals that, were being oppressed by Homo sapiens sapiens. It is one theory that we are essentially already being watched or observed by a more intelligent life form. I don't even know what to call it. And when we had Robin Hansen on, he was absolutely certain that the only reason that we haven't had, kind of reasonable interception from aliens or extraterrestrials is that they're waiting for us to do something so they can harvest us.
He believes that they're sitting at the edge of our solar system watching us to make sure that we don't become interplanetary, because he believes that would be an existential threat.
Yeah, so that is actually the dark forest hypothesis as a solution to Fermi's paradox. So Enrico Fermi, in around 1950, had lunch in Los Alamos, talking with other physicists about extraterrestrials, and he asked, "Where is everybody?" And by the way, this is a question that every lonely person asks. And what you tell a lonely person is, "Don't be so presumptuous. You're not that attractive. You should go to dating sites and find others. It's not as if they will come to you." And Enrico Fermi didn't build a telescope. He didn't really search. Now, the dark forest solution to Enrico Fermi's paradox, where is everybody, is that they are out there. There are many of them out there, but for survival, they decide not to make a sound. They are silent. That's why we can't detect them. And they are listening to us because they want to protect themselves. And if they notice that we develop as a young technological civilization, they might see us as a threat and visit us. And that could be the source of a visit, of a technological object. And I brought it up in a paper this month in the context of 3I Atlas. This is the third interstellar object discovered on July 1st, 2025. And what was special about it, first of all, the brightness was so large that if you were to assume it's a solid object, it had to have a diameter of 20 kilometers. That's bigger than Manhattan Island, twice as big as the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs. And it's just extremely rare. Okay, so I calculated, well, first of all, there should have been hundreds of thousands of Oumuamua-sized objects. That was just the size of a football field, 100 meters or so. And there are many more small objects than big rocks. But more importantly, the interstellar space can deliver a rock of 20 kilometers at best once per 10,000 years. If you take all the rocky material, pack it into 20-kilometer rocks, once per 10,000 years, you can get one to cross the inner solar system at the speed of 3I Atlas. So, and we saw it after 1 decade of surveying the sky. So that was unusual. And then more dramatically, the trajectory of this object is exactly aligned with a plane in which the planets orbit the sun to within 5 degrees. And, that coincidence is 1 in 500, okay, for it to lie exactly in the plane. It means that along its path, it can come very close to several planets. In fact, it comes very close to Mars, Venus, and Jupiter. And it wouldn't be able to do that if it came at an angle. And moreover, it arrives closest to the sun when the Earth is on the opposite side of the sun. So we won't be able to observe it. And that's the best point to make a maneuver using the sun's gravity. Moreover, it came from a direction in the sky that is full of stars. It's the direction of the center of the Milky Way galaxy. And so I was a co-author of a paper that said, is 3I Atlas alien technology? And of course, if it is alien technology, you can't do the calculation of the mass in rocks in interstellar space because this object is targeting the inner solar system. And, it will pass closest to the sun on October 29th, 2025. I got a text message the other day from someone who said that he is trading options on the volatility of the market with an expiration date of October 29th in order to make money. And I immediately thought, I don't know if there will be meaning to money if this object turns out to be technological after October 29th. If you want to take a vacation, take it before that date, because who knows what will happen. Now, it could be a mothership that releases mini probes, that they come to Earth. The Galileo project that I'm leading is looking for unidentified anomalous phenomena, and we have now 3 observatories, and we will check if after October there is more activity. That would be interesting to check. But as of now, people, astronomers, what you will hear is the sort of the party claim that this is a comet. Now, a comet, by the way, just like a zebra is identified by its stripes, right? That's what how do you tell the difference between a horse and a zebra? It's the stripe. Okay, so how do you tell a comet from a rock that doesn't have any eyes? You tell it by the cometary tail. Okay, that's what distinguishes a comet. And in this case, just yesterday, there was the first analysis of the image from the Hubble Space Telescope of this object. And guess what? There is no tail. But more importantly, there is glow in front of the object instead of behind it.
It's got headlights. It's got headlights. You're not celebrating Halloween this year. That's the take-home message.
Just as an English to English translation, if I'm summarizing, there is a large rock that most scientists think is a comet that is bigger than the size of Manhattan, hurling towards space or hurling through space, potentially towards the Earth, that you believe may be alien technology, potentially a mothership that does not have any of the signs of a comet, but has headlights potentially or a glow in front of it. And it's scheduled to arrive potentially on Earth on October 29th? Is that accurate?
Not to Earth, but to get closest to the sun along its path.
But Avi, it's going to appear when we can't see it, which would be the best time for it to make a sneaky maneuver.
Yes, exactly. You can argue like my colleagues do and say, the trajectory, it's just a random trajectory that happens to be fine-tuned and so perfectly aligned with all these planets. And, it's a coincidence that it happened to come closest to the sun when we can't see it. And it's a coincidence that it passes near all these other planets. By the way, even if you take this trajectory and just arrange for a random arrival time, you get 1 in 20,000 chance of it coming as close as it does to Jupiter, Mars, and Venus. It just fine-tuned in the sense that it also comes closest to those planets. Those planets are moving around the sun, in a circle, each of them. And they get to the point where 3i Atlas is just when it arrives there. Like, how can that happen?
Maybe you're crazy. Maybe they're just going to say, Avi's crazy. But is this sort of the way we have to think? Meaning, if you're going to open up the possibility that there's extraterrestrial life, it's got 1 million or billion years of head start on us, you have to open your mind to the possibility of what if. And so every time you see something that we can't yet explain or we can't yet measure, we get to open our minds and say, what if? What are the possibilities? What's the clinical, scientific, quantifiable way to examine it rather than just dismiss it?
Yeah, or assume that it's the same as we have seen before, because that's the usual approach of scientists, of anyone. And my point is that, in fact, I suggested establishing a new scale between 0 and 10, which is now called the Loeb scale, because I suggested it a month ago, and there was actually a paper yesterday that I co-authored about it. And the idea is a 0 would be an object that definitely shows a cometary tail, okay, or looks like an asteroid, has all the characteristics that we are familiar with of a rock or an icy rock. That's 0. And 10 would be an object that is definitely technological because it maneuvers or has some artificial lights or has some unusual shape or transmits signals, something, or has, releases much more heat than you expect from the solar illumination. It has some engine that gives it additional heat. All of these signatures would raise a flag. And if it looks like it's technological, then there needs to be an organization that is international, because the aliens do not care how we split territories on this rock that we were born on. There is much more real estate out beyond Earth, and they would be completely amazed that we are worried.
They're like hippies. They don't believe in borders.
No, what we decide here on Earth is very local. We are obsessed with it. All our geopolitics is all about territories, and they would think, who cares? This is a tiny rock out of billions of them out there. But so they would not distinguish us based on the nation that we belong to. So therefore, it will be a problem of humanity as a whole. And this organization needs to be international. So my recommendation is there should be an organization, because we are worried about existential threats from artificial intelligence. There is a lot of talk about it. From climate change, there is a lot of talk about it. From an asteroid impact, there is modest talk about that. But I'm saying another type of threat would be alien tech. Okay. And there should be an organization that decides what to do. Why? Because when we imagine, in the context of Contact, the film or the book, if we imagine detecting a radio signal from a star that is thousands of light years away, there is no urgency. There is plenty of time, because it would take them a lot of time to reach us. Even if we respond, we have time to respond. There is no immediate threat. But if you have a visitor in your backyard, you immediately need to decide what to do about it. And that depends on the intent and the capabilities of the visitor and the specific characteristics of the visitor. And each visitor deserves special attention. So my point is, this organization, when in the next decade, the Rubin Observatory will discover an interstellar object every few months. We're entering a new phase now. In the last 8 years, we discovered only 3. Okay, so now every 3 months there will be a new one, and we need to develop a strategy of how to deal with things that are high on this Loeb scale of risk, that are above 5. Let's say we need to develop a response to that, especially if it's close to 10. We need to decide how to deal with that, and we haven't thought about that. There is no such organization, and nobody discusses it.
You predict that within a generation, we will be able to conceive of, and that can mean a lot of different things, a small craft or a miniature satellite containing an advanced computer system with AI that stores the complete DNA information of all species existing on Earth as of 2022. This is likened to a modern day Noah's Ark. You're talking about an artificial intelligence fueled DNA catalog of all species existing on Earth as of 2022. What would we do with this artificial intelligence Noah's Ark of DNA?
Well, that's different, because for that you need someone to visit us and go there, and I'm not sure they have any motivation to search for it. But we spend our life replicating our DNA by having babies. I don't know. I have 2 daughters, and that's one approach to maintaining longevity. Another one is to write a book.
Either have sex and make babies or write a book. Those are the choices.
All of these are calculations for the short term, because in 7.6 billion years, the sun will, in fact, in 1 billion years, the sun will boil off all oceans on Earth. We need to go somewhere else. We need to go to space. And the question is how to maintain the longevity of what we care about. And first of all, you might want to record everything we care about. Now, Noah, in the biblical story, built an ark, okay, and put animals in it. I'm saying, forget about the animals. It's so much work to pack them into a spacecraft, and then would they survive? You need to feed them and so forth. Let's have just the information of life on Earth encoded and sent out, so that if someone finds it, they can recreate. And that someone could be a human that survived because when Earth had a catastrophe, that human was wealthy enough to build a spacecraft and escape. So, but at least they will have the ability to reproduce what was demolished here on Earth somewhere else. But it could also be some other intelligent beings out there. If I ever met aliens, I would ask them 2 questions. The first one would be, what was there before the Big Bang? And that question relates to what we discussed before, because then we would have a recipe to make a universe. And the second question would be, where do you hold your social events? Where is the hub that I can meet others and socialize? Because if you think about Darwin's theory of the fittest surviving, if you apply it to interstellar space, you're dealing not with millions of years of evolution on Earth, but you're dealing with catastrophes on many other planets where there was a population of intelligent beings like us, and their star erupted and killed them all, and there were tragedies that we are not aware of because we were not around to hear their cries for help. But I'm sure there is a lot to cosmic history where a lot of tragedies of very intelligent beings, more intelligent than we are, that perished because of some catastrophe. A star exploded next to them, something bad happened, a big asteroid they didn't notice, something. And eventually the fittest survived. Somehow, a small minority of those civilizations managed to escape the hazardous environment that they were born in and live for. So I'm saying if we have that ambition of survival, it might make sense for us to go interstellar.
You mentioned that in 1.6 billion years, the sun will boil off all the oceans and we will have to go somewhere else. But you dropped it very casually. Do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, so the sun is just a nuclear reactor, okay, a fusion reactor, and it has a limited amount of fuel, okay? So once it starts burning a significant fraction of the fuel, it will start dying. And within 1 billion years, it will become brighter, actually, to start with. And then it will boil off. The temperature on Earth will rise, and all the oceans will evaporate. The Earth will become a desert, just like Mars. Mars lost its oceans because it lost its atmosphere, but the Earth, in the distant future, will lose its oceans because of the sun getting brighter. And when Elon Musk talks about saving humanity by going to Mars, I don't see that as a great vision, because Mars is just another rock nearby. So we go from one rock to another, just like if you are in the jungle, you go from one tree to another, and then it's a big success story. No, you just found another tree. So who cares? Like, the real advance of humanity was to go from those trees in Africa to a high rise in New York City or somewhere else, a big city. That's a big transition. We are not dependent on the bananas that are happening to grow in our environment. We actually can have agriculture that makes the amount of food that we need, that. So the next transition is actually to build a habitat in space that can support us. And by the way, I see that less of a jump than going from the jungles of Africa to a high rise in New York City. Going from a high rise in New York City to space is less of a transition, as far as I can tell. And I see that as the future of humanity. I do think that we need to go to space. I don't think we should just target another rock that happened to be next to us, like the moon or Mars, because that's very narrow-minded. So the moon will also be inhospitable in 1 billion years. And we should build some habitat in space that supports us, and then we can go places.
I mean, I don't know that you want to go to Mars. The radiation is very bad there. There's a lot of things that seem very inhospitable that I would not want to go there. If we think about the interstellar Gardner theory and Earth like an experiment or like a recipe that was created, and potentially many, you make a lot of muffins that fail before you make your first great muffin that has all the good things in it. So if Earth is this amazing recipe that was created, potentially there's a bunch of failed ones before, potentially there's a bunch of failed attempts at humanity to evolve. Some of the conflict may be, are we going to destroy ourselves through potential nuclear annihilation?
Yeah. And by the way, related to what you just said, there is a question. Suppose you dig down in Earth. Could there be any? We haven't found any computer terminals in digs, right? So, it's reasonable to assume that we are the first technological civilization on Earth. But that should not be taken for granted, because if it happened, let's say 200 million years ago, the surface of Earth was mixed with the interior as a result of geological activity. So, so far we haven't found evidence for a technological civilization that predated us. But if you go 200 million years back, it's just 5% of the history of Earth, going back, to when it was 95% of its current age. It could have been that there was intelligent life back then and it was wiped out. And that's another thing that would make Mayim a little bit uncomfortable. It's too. I think Mayim really wants to stay on Earth and not go anywhere. Is that true, Mayim?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because a lot of what we talk about on our podcast is psi phenomenon. We talk to a lot of scientists who are delving into things like collective consciousness and things like, remote viewing and telepathy and, trying to understand sort of the scientific basis of these things. So I guess I'm interested in the mind. I'm interested in what we can conjure and what we believe. So I'm very interested in transcendental phenomenon. I'm interested in, the similarities between, let's say, ancient mystics and, modern Buddhists. I'm interested in the sort of things that unify us and specifically interested in, the substrates of the brain and the nervous system that allow us to experience these things. I think for a lot of people, the fact that there might have been intelligent life that I'll never be able to detect doesn't feel like the highest priority. But when, something like the telepathy tapes goes viral saying that nonverbal autistic children all meet in a virtual collective consciousness place, like that's kind of interesting to me. Like, what?
I should say we now have some new tool that didn't exist in the past that would actually revolutionize the way we think about the mind, and that's AI. It's an artificial neural network. And my point is, we might realize that what we call consciousness, these are just states of a very complex neural network. So once we reach the number of parameters in AI systems that is equivalent to the number of parameters in the human brain, it will exhibit all the phenomena. And when you ask what is free will, for example, I would argue it's actually a result of the human brain being so complex and so unpredictable because of its complexity, and the environment that influences it being so complex as well, that makes our actions unpredictable. So we call it free will, but in reality, it's just we can imitate that by building a neural network that is artificial, that is as complex as the human brain or even more. And when we build AI that is more complex than the human brain, we'll see superhuman intelligence, something that our brain cannot comprehend because it was limited by biological constraints. And the question is, will we meet a superior intelligence because we developed it in AI, artificial intelligence, or because alien intelligence visits us? That is my question. Which one would be first?
Always with the aliens, Avi. Always. It always comes back to the aliens.
I see a connection between what you're both saying. If Earth was an experiment, a recipe that was created, and we think about the creation of Earth not from a big bang, but from some external source, which I think is really interesting because it touches on what people are fascinated about with simulation theory. Not that we can't control things, but that there's some larger creator outside of our environment.
Isn't that the theme of religions?
Well, that's what I was also going to say, is that we have this fascination. So, what I'm really interested in, how the through line in narratives, even from disparate sources, have a commonality that may point to a universal truth of some kind, even if the detail of the story is wrong. But maybe what the fact that everyone is fascinated by something may point to something else. So, in your theory of the interstellar gardener, or the creation of the Earth from an outside source, then the question is, well, why create it? So the purpose of creating life then goes to the purpose of us being here. We're all cute and funny, and we like to make jokes and have make babies and write books. And but then the question a lot of the spiritual people ask is, well, what is the larger purpose? Is it simply to propagate the species, or are we here to evolve in some capacity?
Well, my view is that we are completely insignificant. We have no purpose. We are just, so we tend to think that we are important. That's what my daughters thought. When they were young, they thought that they're important. But once you realize the cosmos at large, it's not about us. We are late to the party. We arrived in the last few million years of cosmic history. And we are not at the center of stage. So if you are going to a play and you are not at the center of stage and you are late to the play is not about you. Okay, I'm sorry to break it down. And that is, going against what we want to believe. And we think that even if aliens visit us, it's because we are fascinating, they want to do something, they realize that we are interested. No, they may be just like, someone that walks on the street and happens to step on an ant in the crack of the pavement, and the ant thinks it's all about itself. Like I say, forget about us being we don't have a purpose. I think we should just enjoy the show. We are in this beautiful show that the cosmos is giving us. Instead of looking up, we keep reading the news, the news every day that are depressing. We look down on other people. I say, there is a much more uplifting story going on in the universe at large, and we are not a central part in it. That's the amazing thing, that we can actually realize that we should be humble. Imagine that we can be humble. We can realize that there is something bigger than us.
I 100% agree with you. And the experiment could be totally insignificant, yet still an experiment with a potential outcome, which is, will this toy species that was created be able to make the leap outside of the end result of when the earth will end? And in the process of doing so, it may be that we have to use extrasensory capability. We have to expand the notion of what we believe. We have to avoid only becoming sheep and learning how to question.
So what do you think? How do they view us right now? Is a success story or is a failure?
No, I think they're like, how is it that they possibly have been so blind for so long, continuing to fight amongst themselves, continuing to believe that they're so important, when the larger opportunity is so much greater than they can potentially see?
That's exactly my point. That's exactly my point. And that's one reason I'm really studying interstellar space and looking for someone else out there, because I look at the party that we have here on Earth, and I don't enjoy it so much. And so I'm looking through the window to see if there is any newcomer to the party that will improve the quality of the party. Like and you just look at world politics and people fighting each other in conflicts. We are wasting resources on killing each other. We could do much better. We are not the pinnacle of creation. There is room for improvement, and perhaps by seeing someone who survived for much longer, billions of years, we will get a role model that is better than our politicians.
I I completely agree. And to tie this back again to what you're saying is what Mayim's perspective is on psi phenomenon and looking at expanding consciousness in the more, specific human interaction. Is there a collective consciousness? Are we actually bridged by something non-material that we may otherwise not have realized? Although the mystics point to it, that can also increase our ability to feel more connected to one another, have a more unified feeling, have more awe, wonder, joy.
So I had two interesting events 6 months ago. One, there was a group of scholars from the organization Christianity Today that came to visit me at Harvard, and they wanted to. They asked me whether, if we find extraterrestrials, whether it will, do any harm to their religious belief. And I said, look, I have two daughters, and when the second one was born, it didn't take away from the love that I have to the first one. So imagining that God is like a parent that can attend only to one child is very demeaning. Like God can have as many civilizations as we want out there in the universe, and God should be able to deal with all of them. Now, of course, if we have siblings, we might get jealous because, just like in a family, if your sister or brother happens to be more successful than you are, you might be jealous. I mean, so if we find extraterrestrials that are more accomplished than we are in science and technology, we might be jealous. But that will not take away your religious belief that there is a parent. And they accepted that, actually, and they were happy with that answer. Now, the second event was a Jewish gathering where I was asked about the same issue. And again, I think science is not in contradiction with religion, the way many people portray it, in the sense that if you have a universe and you don't want to study it and you want to believe in God, you actually are losing something, because when there is an object that is very delicate, in fact, the best expression of love to someone else is when you want to know everything about that person. That's the most sincere expression of love. You want to know everything about the subject of your love. And so if you want to believe in God, doing science is the best way to express your love, because you want to know everything possible about the universe, right? Anything, any detail that will fill you up with awe. And it's much better to know the details, because you don't appreciate the universe as much if you don't know the details. And science is doing just that. It's getting as much data as possible and improving the view of how the universe came about and what it includes and so forth. So the way I see it is science is an enhancer of religion rather than now, of course, religions make statements about how the universe started that are not consistent with the Big Bang theory that we have right now. But all of these statements about things that science can explore about the physical reality should not be held as absolute truth, because science is work in progress. But in general, philosophically speaking, I think science can enhance your religious awe. And science, if you study the universe, you should be modest, because you realize that you are not that important. You're short-lived. You have such a small body on compared to the rest of the universe. It's inappropriate to have this hubris that people often have about our importance.
I wonder if you feel like that's sort of just part of our machinery, meaning, when you look at the variety of experiences that people have, and we talk to some really interesting near-death experience people who, have these incredible experiences, and what the kind of unifying emotional content of it is, even if we remove the God, kind of concept, the sort of unifying experience that people in near-death experiences talk about, people in transcendental experiences, psychedelic experiences, deep meditative experiences, people describe love. And what many people say is like that word is not even sufficient to describe the feeling inside, right? When you feel protected, and it's different than anything on this human plane. Do you think that that's just sort of part of the machinery, in which case religion would be a way to sort of create, this sort of structure that allows us to seek that? Is that just sort of part of the machinery?
I think fundamentally, here is my take on this. Fundamentally, we realize since the time that we are born that we will die. That's a devastating piece of news. Okay? And we work throughout our life to get meaning to living, because what's the meaning of life if you know that it will end and nothing will survive? It's just like unplugging a computer from the power, and then the computer is dead. Even if it has a superhuman intelligence, all of these AI machines, if you stop the power, there will be nothing. And you can think of the human body just like that. When we die, nothing survives. And if you realize that, then you can take two takes on this. One, you can say, oh, actually death doesn't exist. You go to some other world, and in fact, even if you commit suicide, there are these terrorists that are willing to die just for the sake of the promise they're given. They never come back to sue whoever promised them that, of course, and that's the trick here. But the other approach, instead of believing that death is not really the end, is to say, well, I can get a meaning by belonging to something bigger than myself, by feeling a connection. And in fact, because I have a connection to something bigger, that something bigger is actually will survive even my death. Okay, so that, and that's a way of getting some meaning, because there is something bigger than our short life. And, I see myself in a much more lonelier place. I don't get meaning by connecting to other people with the same devastating fate. If all of us will die, then the connection I have to other people would also disappear. I see myself as, I would be really happy if there was a way to use AI-assisted medicine to live forever. I would be really happy to live forever, to simply eliminate this catastrophe that we imagine, where we will die, and that's why we do work throughout our life to fulfill some kind of a meaning. Instead of that, let's avoid dying. Okay, we can do that. with AI-assisted medicine, if we can avoid dying, then that would be amazing, because there is so much that we don't understand about the universe, and I would like to understand it. And that could take me millions of years, billions of years. I'll be happy to live for that long. Of course, I'll give up my tenure at Harvard because I want younger people to also hold this job. That would not be the issue. But I really want to live forever, instead of saying, okay, I will die and let's all believe in something else. Instead of that, let's accept that we would die if we let biology dictate our fate. But we can avoid biology by understanding why we die and preventing it. And it's sort of like fixing a car. The engine might not work after a while, but you realize that you can fix the engine and then it will work. And then the car would drive forever. And that, to me, is the actual meaning. The meaning is to find a way to live forever, really to live forever, not by having babies or writing books, but you yourself. And just think about the wisdom that you will accumulate in 1,000,000 years.
You'll accumulate an enormous amount of wisdom, but you'll then face the oceans boiling off and have to leave anyway.
Oh no, you go to space, as I said. You don't rely on this rock that we were born on. It's just like going from the jungles to a high rise. The next step is going from a high rise to a space station.
Tell us about hidden black holes.
We don't know what most of the matter in the universe is, and that's 85% of the matter in the universe. The atoms that we are made of, that our body is made of, is ordinary matter, but apparently there is there 6 times more of something else, some stuff that we don't know. The only reason we know about it is because it gravitates, it affects gravity, it binds galaxies together, and the visible matter is unable to do that. So we call it invisible matter. We call it dark matter. It's just a way of encapsulating our ignorance. And, one possibility is that in the early universe, early on, there were tiny black holes that were made. And black holes would not produce any light. Those black holes that have roughly the mass of an asteroid, similar to 3I Atlas. And if it's an asteroid, we don't know what it is. But those black holes, small black holes, will behave as dark matter. That's one possibility. Just to explain what a black hole is, that's a structure of space-time. As I mentioned, gravity is the curvature of space-time. And if you condense matter to a point, then you get such a major curvature of space-time that you get a region of space that nothing can escape from. So it's sort of the ultimate prison. Another way to think of it is like Vegas. Anything that happens inside a black hole will never go out of it. Everything that happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. In the case of a black hole, it's definitely the case. Even light cannot escape from a black hole. And by the way, I was the founding director of the Black Hole Initiative at Harvard University, and Stephen Hawking came to my home and for the inauguration, and my wife he came for Passover, actually. That was his first experience, and he ate everything that my wife made for him and loved it, actually, and gave a speech about it. But coming back to black holes, he was one of the people who actually studied them in great detail and realized their properties. But he also realized, that's a funny story, that back in around 1972, there was a graduate student at Princeton named Jacob Bekenstein. And he said, well, it looks like black holes might have entropy, because when you put two of them together, you get more surface than the sum of the surfaces that each of them had. And that sounds like entropy that is always increasing. And the entropy should be proportional to the area, the surface area of the event horizon of a black hole. That was a revolutionary idea. And his mentor, John Wheeler, said it's such a crazy idea that it might be true. Coming back to you, Mayim, sometimes crazy ideas are true. Anyway, so Stephen Hawking thought that's a stupid idea. And he said, I will demonstrate that it's wrong. So he did a quantum mechanical calculation and realized, in fact, Bekenstein was right. Black holes not only have an entropy, but they actually emit thermal radiation, and they evaporate as a result of that. So small black holes, very tiny black holes, would explode. And that's the most important result derived by Stephen Hawking by trying to prove Bekenstein wrong. So what does it teach us? It teaches us first that scientists can change opinions, okay? And that's accepted because if you realize new results or new evidence, you're allowed to change opinions. It's not politics. You can change opinions because you realize something you didn't realize before. It's work in progress. And the second thing is, even black holes that you would think are the blackest things that you can imagine that do not emit any light, even they emit light.
So what does that mean to our understanding of the fabric of the universe? Like what are these black holes doing in terms of our world?
So every galaxy, like the Milky Way, so the universe is organized to stars forming in the core of galaxies, and there are about 1 trillion galaxies like the Milky Way in the observable volume of the universe, and many more beyond. So we can see only out to some distance, which is called the cosmic horizon. That's the distance that light traveled since the Big Bang. We cannot see beyond that because light could not have bridged the distance farther away. And within that distance, we see 1 trillion galaxies like the Milky Way. Inside each of them, there are about 100 billion stars like the sun. Okay, and so at the center of each galaxy, there is a supermassive black hole. There is a black hole that must have been the result of, it's just like water going down the drain. Some gas and stars, went to the center of the galaxy and made this black hole. And you see it in every galaxy. Our galaxy has a black hole of 4 million times the mass of the sun at the center. And every galaxy, there are black holes that exist all the way back to when the universe was just about 5% of its present age, that have black holes that are up to 10 billion times the mass of the sun. And so these are giant black holes, by the way. If you wanted to make a black hole, one way with ordinary matter, if you were to pour water into the orbit of Jupiter, if you fill the orbit of Jupiter with water, you will get a black hole of about 100 million times the mass of the sun. You just need a huge swimming pool where you pour water. There is not enough water in the Milky Way galaxy to do that, but I'm just saying, if you pour water fill the orbit of Jupiter with water, you get, this would be within the event horizon of a black hole of 100 million times the mass of the sun. And these black holes, these supermassive black holes, exist at galaxy centers. And we don't know what happens at the center of black holes because, again, Einstein's theory breaks down. And my advice to, some string theorists who have conjectures about how to unify quantum mechanics and gravity is take a journey into a black hole and figure it out. And they blame me for having an ulterior motive for sending them into a black hole.
There's like some way out there theories, though, that like we are in a black hole, or black holes are the way that you go through to multiverses.
But that's not substantiated by what we know as of now, because what happens close to the singularity of a black hole is very different than the type of universe that we are observing. The universe is pretty much uniform all the way out to the cosmic horizon, has the same conditions everywhere. And these conditions go out to distances that are at least 4,000 times bigger than we can see. So it's just a huge volume that has the same conditions. By the way, there is this question of how were these conditions arranged across such vast scales to be the same? Because if you go look in one direction, the light arrived just now to us from that cosmic horizon. You look at the opposite direction, it arrived to us just now. There wasn't enough time for light to cross the diameter of the cosmic horizon. So from that point to the other point. And there must have been something special in the way the universe was prepared early on. And there are theories about that.
I do think it's strange that all these galaxies have these garbage disposals as black holes in the middle that just like we don't know what's happening.
Think of it as an amusement park, because if you get close to the horizon of a black hole, time is ticking more slowly. So it would make sense to have a beauty salon there. Another thing, because you will age more slowly than anyone else far away. And if you look straight, light, if you go to the right place, light goes in a circle around the black hole, so you can see your back by looking forward. And you can dump your trash into a black hole and get a lot of clean energy in return. You know, that's the ultimate source of clean energy. It's very environmentally friendly if you're not burned by the burst of radiation that comes from that. But if you wanted to use your trash and convert it to energy more efficiently than a nuclear reactor can, a black hole is the best location for that. So having a civilization close to a black hole is a great, perk.
I want to ask a question that is not necessarily political, but it does involve sort of, political entities in that. Um, one of the things that's so maddening to me is that there may actually be debris, artifacts, unidentified materials that the government has. And obviously, there's an entire, universe, for lack of a better word, of conspiracy theories around what the government doesn't want us to know and what the government already knows and what the government is covering up. What's the best way to sort of approach this? I wish that there was some, kind of way to just say, you have to release this information. But if we can't get the Jeffrey Epstein papers, I don't think UFOs are going to come easier.
First of all, let me mention an anecdote, because a few days ago, I participated in a podcast where I was asked, some of our audience members are saying that you floated the possibility that 3i Atlas is alien technology in order to distract us from the Epstein files. And my response to that is, go to Amazon right now and purchase a 0.5 meter telescope, because that would allow you to see the object in the sky. I cannot really fake it. It's not something I can create with a Jewish laser. And because it's so far away, it's like 4 times the Earth-Sun separation. And the Hubble Space Telescope, the Webb Telescope, are looking at it, and it's in the right direction. It has to be very far. And it's real. It's something real in the sky, and you can see it yourself. So that's the difference. One difference between a conspiracy theorist and a scientist is as follows. I was asked how to tell the difference. How do you tell the difference between a conspiracy theorist and a scientist? It's very easy. You just give them more data. The scientists will be delighted, even if it contradicts their previous views on the subject. But the more data we have, the better knowledge we have. And, if a scientist is not too attached to their ego, they should be delighted with more data. But a conspiracy theorist will be upset, especially if the data violates their conspiracy theory. And so that's the simplest way to tell the difference. If you have a friend and you don't know whether that is a conspiracy theorist or a scientist, just ask them this question: would you be happier if you had more data? And so coming back to your question, how do we tell that, if the government holds secrets? It's by seeing the data. I don't believe stories that people tell me. I don't care about stories. I want to see the evidence, okay? And if I see it, I'll believe it. If the government has something that they know about, and by the way, Tulsi Gabbard just expressed herself a few days ago, saying that, she knows about objects that may be interesting. She didn't really get into details. And, that's interesting. I would like to see that data and maybe help government figure it out. But without seeing the data, I don't care what stories people tell me, because I was burned many times before when people would say something, turns out to be wrong. And, it's wishful thinking. Sometimes people illusion themselves. They want to believe something, and as a result, they believe in it. But it turns out to be unsubstantiated. So, the judicial system, if you go to a courtroom, the decision is made by people, okay? And very often there is no hard data, and they have to make a judgment. But look at how many times people on death row were exonerated as a result of DNA evidence. And that tells you that not only the jury, but but also the people who testified against them were fully convinced that they're guilty, and it turns out they're not guilty. And so, why believe people? I mean, I that's why I don't like social media, because you can be liked. Everyone would believe the same thing, the same story, but the story is completely fabricated. And by the way, I should say one more thing. Over the past few days, I was interviewed maybe on, I would say, 2 dozen, over the past few days, 2 dozen television stations. And the one thing that struck me, it was including Fox News, CNN, Newsmax, a lot of, from all stripes of politics, okay, of the political spectrum. And what was remarkable to me is they would invite me to join 10 minutes before the interview, so I would hear other stories before my segment, and I would hear the same stories on the same day, and I would see how the same story is being told in different television stations, and it's remarkable how different the narrative is. It's, our society in the US right now is so polarized. I got a first-hand look at that by hearing those segments before mine on the stories of the day being told in completely different ways. And that's supposed to be professional reporters, right? Well, they are very biased, I must say, because these stories were not compatible.
You mentioned earlier in the interview that you weren't finding much intelligence in academia. Can you speak to academia and the nature of these institutions, which have the largest amount of research happening? What are you seeing there in terms of their approach to breaking down siloed narratives or status quo to find, more interesting truth?
You see, when I entered science, I was under the illusion that it's all about merit, that it's not about showing off. It's about, discovering something substantive. And then once you discover it, everyone will accept it, and it will be a great contribution to our knowledge. That was the narrative that I got from reading textbooks about how how physics went through early on. But now, in retrospect, more than 40 years after that, and by the way, I lived through about half of modern physics, the history of modern physics. So I started modern physics when it was half its current age, which makes me a good spectator, being able to gauge what really is going on. And what I see is that, academia was initially constructed in a way that you give tenure to individuals based on their accomplishments, and that would free them from the burden of being liked or everyone agreeing with them. They could explore new territories of knowledge that are very often foreign to most people. They feel uncomfortable when you tell them that not everything in the sky is rocks, because they are still in the Stone Age where everything in the sky must be stones. We know that we send space probes out there, and so other civilizations might have done the same. Why is that a heresy? And so the point is that academia was constructed to allow the freedom to think outside the beaten path, and that's the idea of tenure. But what you find in reality is that once people get tenure, they are all about virtue signaling, about showing off, showing that they are smart, because they need to get funding to their students, postdocs, so they need to build echo chambers that repeat their mantra, and they expect the people that work with them to repeat their mantras, not to violate their dogma or doctrine. And as a result, what you end up is in a situation where you have these silos, as you mentioned, that people belong to a narrative that was known for a while, and they feel that their ego is tied up with that narrative, and that they want to promote that narrative with everyone they work with, so that they will get more funding, they will get honors and awards. So it's all about showing off and demonstrating to your peers that you're smart. But that's not really the reason to do scholarship. The reason should be to understand, especially in context of physics, to understand the physical reality in the context of science. So how can you have the mainstream of theoretical physics for nearly 50 years working on a concept of extra dimensions, on supersymmetry and so forth? These are ideas that are the foundation of string theory, and we have no experimental test to validate the path that we're taking. There is nothing that says you're taking the right path. You can go on this path forever, but you want to know whether this path leads anywhere or should you have taken a different path. And the fact that it's celebrated in academia, that people got honors awards for just showing that they're smart without actually explaining nature, to me illustrates the unfortunate fate of academic life, that is all about showing off and demonstrating that you are smart, but it's not about understanding nature in the context of the sciences. And so I feel that we're missing the point. Now, on top of that, I belong to Harvard University. I have three narratives to my identity. One is I was born in Israel. Second, I'm Jewish. And third, I'm a scientist. And finally, I'm a member of the Harvard University professors sort of club, so to speak. And all of these facets of my existence, my identity, were under attack over the past 2 years. And I'm entirely proud of my roots. I will not apologize for any of these traits, for being born in Israel, for being Jewish, being a scientist, or being at Harvard University. And I believe, and I actually criticized, the politics in Israel. I criticized the politics at Harvard. And I spoke with who is now the president of Harvard, and after October 7th, and said, here are the ways that Harvard should improve. Because what happened was that politics and the far progressive left ideas were introduced to campus. And that is not a good way to maintain scholarship. Politics should be out of campus, because you're getting students that come from homes that represent, half of the country that is conservative. And you should not introduce a political narrative into scholarship, because you alienate those students, even if they don't tell you that. The same is true about faculty hires. And I think what Harvard suffers right now is a result of this unfortunate approach that was taken over the past decade or two. And we shouldn't have gone this path, okay? And so just to summarize my answer to you, in the context of science or scholarship in general, we should care about the subject that we are studying, not about showing off and demonstrating that we are smart. That's not the objective. And in the context of scholarship more broadly, we should not bring politics into the camp. Of course, we should listen to each other and respect different views, and there should be diversity of opinions. And there shouldn't be a political narrative that favors one extreme of the political map. And I think all the problems we have right now in academia result from those two roots. And the public, is losing some of the trust in our academic institutions because of that.
Avi, before we let you go, tell us a few of your most out there ideas that get you in hot water or get people maybe doing a double take at a dinner party.
You should ask them about that, because to me, all of the ideas sound completely natural. I'm not trying to be provocative. For example, with respect to 3i Atlas, I did not reach out to any news agency. I just wrote my papers, and then the New York Post didn't interview me. They just wrote a big sensational story, and that was picked up by other journalists, and then it became viral. And then, so I'm sorry, but the one thing about my life that I don't fully understand is, to me, everything I say makes sense. It sounds like common sense, and I don't expect it to be unusual. And in fact, when people tell me that it sounds strange or unusual, I'm surprised. But on the other hand, it was a benefit for me, because otherwise I would not get tenure at Harvard. I got tenured within 3 years, and I got my PhD at age 24. Now, if you ask how is that possible, it's because for some reason other people do not have these ideas. I'm not good at computers, for example. When I finished my PhD and I came to visit the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton, the person there that offered me a 5-year fellowship, John Bacall, he asked me, what computer languages are you using? And I said, well, I'm just using programs that can allow me to solve ordinary differential equations. And otherwise, I don't care much about computers. And he said, how do you think you will have a career? That was 1986. And the only reason I managed to have a career is because I think of ideas that other people do not think about. Now, you ask me, how is that possible? If other people had the same ideas, then nobody would care about me. I would never be reported about by the New York Post. I would never get the attention that I get, like, a dozen TV stations over the past few days. I would never get to appear in 4,000 podcasts over the past 5 years. But miraculously, it doesn't come up in the minds of other people. I don't know why.
I think they gave you tenure because they didn't want you to keep asking questions. They were like, let's just give him tenure. He'll stop asking questions.
Who is this person in the Haggadah of Passover who asks questions? How is that person regarded?
Oh, are you the wise, the simple, the wicked, or the one who does not know to ask?
No, the asking questions is the wise, isn't it?
Yes, well, there's different kinds of questions.
I think they gave him tenure to protect him. They're like, if you don't have tenure, so they're going to throw you right out of here. We better make sure you're safe.
Well, let me say the following. I had the same flow of ideas, the same rate of new ideas since I was young. I'm jogging every morning at sunrise for 3 miles. I'm in very good shape. And, nothing much changed. And if at some point I stop having ideas, I told my students, you can shoot me. That's no problem. Because what's the point of living,
You grew up on a farm, and I wonder if you can tell us maybe 3 things that you learned as a child that you feel created the scientist that you are today.
I loved going on a tractor to the hills of the village to read the philosophy books. And that gave me sort of the peace of mind away from people. And that's one thing that I'm practicing now. I don't care how many likes I have. It's really irrelevant. And philosophy gave me a sense of the bigger picture, thinking about the big picture, not about the technical details. Because, in science, most scientists are nerds. They just dig down the path that they took early on, and they reach sometimes the bedrock of the subject they work on, and then they can't discover anything new. And I'm very different. I'm broad. I look at it philosophically. That makes me quite different. And the only reason I ended up as a scientist is because of circumstances, that I was recruited to the Israeli military, and I thought the best way of passing through those years would be to pursue a degree in physics and mathematics, and that was possible in a special program that I attended. And actually, the reason I'm in the US is because President Reagan started the Strategic Defense Initiative in the mid 1980s, and the first international project that they funded was led by me and an experimentalist, and that brought me to Washington, D.C. And after that, I was offered a position at Princeton. And so, it was all a chain of circumstances. And later in life, I realized that it was an arranged marriage, but I'm actually married to my true love, because I can pursue philosophical questions using the scientific method. And that's what I'm doing. And the last thing that I learned from childhood was the connection to nature. Nature is so beautiful. When I jog every morning, I see, wild turkeys, ducks, bunnies. It's just beautiful. I enjoy that. Much more rewarding than speaking with people. Okay. And this connection to nature came from my childhood on a farm. And so 3 things: having the philosophical outlook, and being connected to nature, and not, the style of being on a farm is also, you want to get the job done. That's the kind of people I work with. That's the father that I have. He wouldn't say much. He would solve problems. He would not, show off. It's a very different tradition of actually doing things than talking about them. And what you find today on social media is people talk and talk and talk and not do anything. Even if they care about the cause, they use it to signal their virtues rather than actually solve the problem. They would put something in their backyard, a sign that says that they care about the problem, but they wouldn't do anything to solve the problem. This is not the way. And the right way is, that what my father taught me, which is, just do it, and do it in a way that is not bragging. It's just doing the right thing.
Our final question for you, what do you want people to think about when they think about the future of humanity, our species, or our planet?
Okay, first, I thought that you will ask a question that I was asked recently, and that is, how do I want to be remembered? And the answer to that is by my future work. I don't care about what I did in the past. I want people to remember me by what I will do in the future. Okay, and it will always be true because I always want to get better. But in terms of the future of humanity, it basically follows from what we discussed. My hope is that, first of all, we will realize, let's say, if 3i Atlas happens to be alien tech, or if some future object happens to be alien tech, we will come together. We will realize that we are all in the same boat, and it will start a sort of a messianic age of cooperation here on Earth. That's my hope, that instead of looking down at each other, we will look up. And then once we realize there is much more real estate out there, and the stage is so big and offers so many resources, my hope is that within the next few hundreds of years, humanity will move on to have groups of people living on platforms, the space platforms. That is the next transition. As we went from trees in the jungle to high rises in cities, and the next step is going to space in a habitat that will support us. And that's the way I see it. Now, my hope is that before I die, we will find a way to extend life. And I want to live forever. If I can do that, then the priorities will change, of course.
Avi, we have the solution. Believe in God and you will live forever.
It could be an illusion that you convince yourself of some story. As I said, I don't want stories. I want actually AI-assisted medicine to extend my life. I don't need a story, because the problem with this story is that once you die, you can't go back and say you were wrong.
I'm going to come back and tell you, Avi. I'm going to be like, Avi, you were wrong. Thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure talking with you. Interstellar, the search for extraterrestrial life and our future in the stars is absolutely delightful. And there's even some funny stuff in it. If you couldn't tell, Dr. Loeb is a funny guy. So thank you so much.
Mayim, I should say that's what my wife says, that I'm funny. And she says, the funny thing about you is that you don't mean to be funny. You're just funny because you believe in what you say, but then it's funny.
I think you missed your calling. You should not have been an astrophysicist. You should have been a comedian.
Really?
No.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Whew. The thing about people who study astrophysics, they take a lot of things for granted that they think people understand. It's been a minute since I have had to think about quantum physics, and it's hard. Like, I just want to sort of touch on this dark matter notion because, I was not raised a scientist, meaning I didn't kind of discover science as a passion of mine until, high school. So I had no idea. I mean, like, zero idea about a lot of the other kind of scientific stuff that many people who were into science knew about. Like, sure, I had known that Carl Sagan existed and oh, I've heard of these things. But it wasn't until, honestly, I took a deep, dive as a scientist in college, in my 20s, that I understood, what does it mean to say that 85% of the matter out there, we don't know what it is. Like, that's a really big concept. And to say, like, well, of course, it's not really gravity, it's just the bend of space time. Like, these are big concepts. So, in case you got lost, there are wonderful resources. Richard Feynman's great. And like, there are great resources to try and, sort of like get a handle on these things. And also the question is also how much, and I'm thinking of you, Jonathan, like how much do you need to know? Meaning like I'm trying to think about what is going through Jonathan's brain when he's like, well, the bend and the black hole and like nothing can go in and light can't reflect out. And if it happens in there, everything stays in there. Ha ha ha, little Las Vegas joke. I'm looking at you and thinking, that's not the best way to explain to Jonathan where 85% of the matter in the universe is. It's hard.
I think about Deepak Chopra, who started our interview with him, our second one, that talked about simulation theory and extrasensory abilities, where he talked about how the one of the hard problems in science is the fact that they don't know what this dark matter is, what it's made out of, what it actually does. And it actually showed a lack of, finishedness to our exploration of our existence, the world around us, and what we are each capable of. Dr. Avi didn't lean into the psi phenomenon, but there was sort of a moment where we were trying to put it together, because I do believe that as he explores outer space, we're exploring our capacity here on Earth. And I do think that there's an evolutionary process that we are all in. And in the sort of scope of time of humanity, we are still just coming out of this space where our perception of reality is so focused and has been so focused on getting food, replicating the species, and continuing to propagate that we don't even see what the larger reality around us is.
I mean, please. I was afraid to ask Avi if he really loves his wife and his children. Maybe he doesn't believe in love. I was afraid. He was getting so binary on me. I was like, I don't want to poke this too much. How do you even know you like your children? And it's just, I got nervous.
What do you think about the potential space rock that may be an intergalactic spaceship heading towards Earth?
The October 29th situation, I mean, look, he definitely identified components of it that I also find very, very, I don't want to say troubling, interesting, surprising, in terms of coincidence. I'm mostly interested in the path that it's taking. I'm not crazy about, I made a headlight joke. I'm not crazy about this notion of like, if there's interstellar space equipment, do they really need headlights? Like, do they need the kind that stay on all the time? Do they switch them on? But there could be other things that are emanating. It's just, I mean, I'll be paying close attention. I'm not making any big Halloween plans. That's for darn tootin' sure.
That's where you go, your Halloween plans.
He said October 29th. I'm like, it's All Hallows Eve is waiting to happen. Jonathan, please remind everyone of all the fun things they can get over on Substack. We're really, really trying to encourage people to join our community over there, which is growing.
It's a growing community of breakers. You can get exclusive content that you cannot get anywhere else. Deep dives with Mayim and I. Special episodes happen there. And Mayim recently released a handful of Big Bang specific material. So if you're a Big Bang fan, you are going to get a lot of awesome content there. Join us on Substack, Mayim Bialik's Breakdown on Substack.
And from our breakdown to the one we hope you never have, we'll see you next time.
It's Mayim Bialik's Breakdown. She's gonna break it down for you. She's got a neuroscience PhD or two. One fiction, one and now she's gonna break down